Hello, everyone. My name is Jenny Chen. Today, I want to give everyone a brief introduction of what healthcare 3D printing is. So before the presentation starts, I want to quote Elon Musk in his recent presentation on Mars expedition. And I think he brought up a really interesting point. Why go anywhere? We're pretty happy on Earth. Why go to Mars? Why explore the space? Why use 3D printing when we have a mature, developed manufacturing industry? Why use this new technology in healthcare sector when we already have so many solutions to save people? I think the driving force behind all innovations, including the desire to go to Mars, the desire to use a new tool like 3D printing in healthcare, is very much the same. It's that we as human species would like to survive for as long as we can. So, what is 3D printing? 3D printing is a 30-year-old technology. It is invented after the birth of computers, so it's actually still relatively a new technology, even though 30 years sounds like a long time. What it is basically a new way of making objects based on digital blueprints. So in this case, instead of carving out a raw material or use mold injection as the traditional manufacturers do, 3D printing adds thin layers of material, one on top of each other. Eventually, it can form all kinds of shapes. The example on the left-hand side is a desktop printer called MakerBot. MakerBot is one example of 3D printer. And here we see there is a very complex three-dimensional object that's being made in front of our eyes. To make the same complex geometry using traditional manufacture will be very difficult to near impossible. On your right-hand side, on the upper corner, there's a demonstration of a scheme of a different kind of 3D printing. It's a different technology called SLA. That said, there are many other 3D printing technologies using different concepts to make 3D printers, but the general principle is still adding thin layer of material one on top of another to eventually form a three-dimensional physical object. So why do we care about this market? This is just some data I put off some analyst reports and as well as a few articles that's been published in recent years. They're by no means the most accurate data, and personally I'm relatively skeptical about analysts' report in general. It's just a prediction. But I do want to just look at this graph slightly in depth in terms of the distribution of the markets within the 3D printing market. As you see, the dental and medical sector in history and in the future seem to occupy a very significant portion of these histograms. One might guess at minimally 20% of the total 3D printing market is occupied by healthcare products. So this is not a market to be ignored. And this is another analyst chart that I pulled off somewhere else. Again, people are in general very optimistic, and it looks like the industry is going to grow in a very good direction to a double-digit billion-dollar market in total. That, however, I want to remind everyone is a very, very tiny percentage of the overall trillion-dollar U.S. manufacturer industry. So that means the room to grow for 3D printing is tremendous. And 25 billion out of a trillion is very, very small. And here's another infographic I pulled off another article. Here is quoted at the bottom, is from a Deloitte report. Basically, it talks about the history of additive manufacture, also known as 3D printing. Some of the landmarks on this graph include the very initial invention of SLA and FDM type 3D printing methods. And Also, these patents are expiring or already expired. What's really important is there are quite a few recent merger and acquisitions in the industries. The next table shows is a comparison of numbers between different analysts' reports. Again, personally, I'm not a big fan of analyst reports. I think of all the numbers that we see here, I think Gartner's number is probably the most reliable to me personally. And I do believe that we do need to have a triple-digit growth rate in 3D printing to even make the technology significant enough to impact manufacturing industry. So some of the success child of the industry are actually surprisingly in healthcare industry. For example, Invisalign is now a billion-dollar company that has been around for more than a decade, and its success is very rare in current 3D printing industry. Some of the other dental applications are also shown here, and we will talk about it later. But Invisalign is definitely one of the poster child of success for 3D printing or healthcare 3D printing. Hearing aid is another great example on how 3D printing transformed an entire industry. This entire hearing aid industry is transformed from traditional manufacture to 3D printing in mere 500 days. And a majority of the hearing aid nowadays are manufactured using 3D printing. And new technology is also coming out. So some of the benefits of using 3D printing in healthcare is, first of all, rapid prototyping. This is already known, not just in healthcare, but also in other industries as well. Mass customization and complex geometries. As you know, human biology is complex. A lot of times, shapes cannot be made easily by any other method. Either it's going to take a lot of time or it's going to waste a lot of material like titanium. And using 3D printing, it will conquer those challenges. Not only it will be able to achieve complex geometries, but also can add material properties by design. Manufacturing hip implants, for example, using 3D printing actually is also cost effective because it saves material. So we have produced infographics not so long ago, kind of summarizing how we can categorize different healthcare products using 3D printing as a foundation. Systematically, you can think of these products are ranging from stuff that's outside of human body, so things are like exoskeleton, wearables, prosthetics, to slightly closer to the human body, including surgical visual aid, so a lot of simulation models, surgical guide, where you can actually put these structures on top of the surgical field to make sure the surgery is accurately proceed, to implants and implantables. We used to have only 25 FDA-approved implants, and now this year, apparently we have 85 plus FDA-approved implants using 3D printing. So it's growing tremendously. And finally, bioprinting, which is using the same concept of controlled digital manufacture process to make living tissue. Some of the limitations of 3D printing in healthcare include one, we already know it takes a long time to make complex structures. And not only is the printing itself takes a long time, but the preparation of the digital file and also the post-processing of the print are also very time-consuming and it requires a lot of art and talent. And it poses a lot of challenges to operational management. The next limitation is there's limited material. As you know, we're in healthcare. We need to have the material that are safe to human body, are safe to be in contact for a long duration of time. And we don't really have a whole lot of good selections. And these material needs to be able to be sterilized if it's to be used in the operating room. And also, if it's implant, then these structures need to be able to stay in the human body for a long period of time, presumably longer than the traditional implants that we have right now. And also, because we're having new materials for 3D printing, a lot of toxicity profiles of these material are not known, especially in the biological system, for a long time. So this would require time and experience to tell us, what material is ultimately good to be used in healthcare industry. Size limitation. As you know, we haven't had a printer right now that can print a whole human body from head to toe yet. If you have a large structure to be printed, you cannot print the whole structure, for example. So unknown legal and regulatory landscape, this scares a lot of investors who want to invest in healthcare industry in general. And in particular, this field is very murky. People are still, a lot of rules and laws are in discussion, and there's no clear cases so far. So just in general, we have very limited experience in this area. And finally, I personally think the biggest problem in this field is there's a lack of creative use. There's a lack of innovators. There are people who have good ideas but don't know how to use the tool. And there are people who are very good at using the tool but don't have good enough ideas that are relevant for clinical use or for healthcare purposes. So that, I think, is the biggest problem of our industry. So I'm going to talk about some of the applications that we have seen. So in terms of prosthetics and exoskeleton, this is quite popular in the media because it's very visual and the stories are very compelling. And these products do not have to go through super rigorous FDA approval process. So they are relatively ready for market. They are accessible. They have, a lot of times they have open source software. Overall, there's a claim that there's significant cost reduction as well as reduction in time or opportunity loss. And there are a lot of nonprofit organizations surrounding these products because of their accessible and low in cost. They can also add other electronic features or other design features onto these prosthetics and exoskeleton to add functions. And it can also add aesthetics to a prosthesis, which I will show some examples of. So Unique is a company that have designed these beautiful covers for prosthetic legs, remove the stigma of some of the disabled patients, and it's very well received in the media. You can look that company up. And here are some examples of Enable Hand. These are open source. You can download the STL file and you can print out and make these hand yourself. And the bottom picture actually shows a robo hand where not only do they have the movement ability, but also these are triggered by myoelectric signals from a patient's arm muscle, so that actually the patient can move the fingers on its own, like an extension, like a robo hand. So I already talked some about the hearing aid, which is part of the wearable category. A new company that's quite exciting that came up recently is called Ear Lens. And this, again, use a new sound amplification technology. Not only that, they also use 3D printing to print the component that can snugly fit the patient's eardrum. The goal is that instead of using air as the sound conduction medium, but now we can generate mechanical force directly, touch the eardrum to generate a sound. So this is supposedly much more effective than a traditional hearing aid. And dental application, I already mentioned, Invisalign is definitely the poster child of success in 3D printing. Some of the other examples, however, may become more popular as some of the patents in 3D printing expire. For example, surgical guide. The surgeons could learn how to print these surgical guides within his or her office and then use them for patients at much reduced rate than having to outsource some of these procedures. In terms of medical applications, there are quite a few pre-surgical applications, starting from communicating with the patients and educating students to pre-surgical training tools, such as this one, which is a biliary tree. By the way, some of these, the links here, you can just type in the link and these will lead to the right articles to show the reference. And finally is the next one will be pre-surgical strategy development, surgical approach, device selection, surgical tool selections. And we're already seeing examples of surgical guides, which is to make sure the patient, the location of the cutting and drilling are accurate. The pre-surgical planning workflow here is going to be published in one of our blogs in the future. This is also a diagram that's pretty standard in terms of how to make a pre-surgical planning model for the surgeons or for education from medical images. And here's one paper that shows the kind of clinical data we would like to have. So in this case, the surgeons can bend these metal plates before the surgery to bend according to this mandible, which is a 3D printing model of this patient. And because they are able to bend these plates accurately with the patient's model, they do not have to bend the plate intraoperatively and therefore saved on average 20 to 30 minutes of operating time. That is not insignificant in a major surgery like this. And finally, some of the examples are surgical guides. So here is an example of surgical guide for hip replacement. As you can see, the purpose of the guide is so that the surgeon will drill holes not just in the right place, but also in the right angle, so that the failure rate of these implants supposedly will decrease over time. And here's a model for medical education. Here's a model for teaching students how to place ventriculostomy shunt catheter, which is basically a shunt that plays into the brain to drain abnormal fluid or blood. Because these top plates can be removed, the students can drill holes in here, practice on it, and then put other plates on, and then sustain the model. And finally, it's a field that's very much still in the research and development field stage, which is bioprinting and tissue engineering. Bioprinting are important in medical and pharmaceutical research in tissue replacement and eventually, hopefully, solve our transplant crisis. So here is a slide that shows some of the tissues that scientists have attempted to grow. It actually covers a variety of tissues and it's quite impressive collection. And finally, recently, Aprecia, which is a seizure medication manufacturer, had the first FDA-approved 3D printed pills. The benefit of these pills is that they have specific shapes and therefore a specific release profile that can allow them to have a different kind of pharmaceutical benefit. So what is the future of healthcare 3D printing? Well, there are a lot of unknowns, but there are a lot of hopes as well. First of all, the reimbursement is an issue. We have not really established how to reimburse a lot of these products, especially for pre-surgical planning. To be reimbursed, you need to have not only FDA approval eventually, but also clinical evidence that requires time and large patient population to be able to accumulate. So that's one challenge. In terms of 3D printer, material development, and software, I am personally very optimistic. I think things are going to the right direction. I'm seeing more and more material that are biocompatible, and I'm seeing the printer's price is going down and much more accessible because the software design is also a lot more user friendly. Especially a lot of these printer manufacturers will also have softwares, and they're just easier and easier to use. So I'm pretty optimistic these will not be a great barrier, but will be just fine. The patent legal issues, there will be a lot of challenges, and I'm very curious to see how things are going to be developed from our legal experts. Quality control, standardization, regulatory issues, I think these will be eventually solved by good organization. For example, Society of Manufacturing Engineering is a large organization that is very interested in creating some of the standards. UL is also very interested in creating some of the standards. So that is basically an overview of what healthcare 3D printing is. So in conclusion, healthcare 3D printing is an extremely new field, but revolutionary. There are quite a few pieces still missing, but I'm hoping to see solutions in the next couple of years. And I believe that this field is positioned to grow exponentially because of the expiring patents and FDA approvals. The initial investments R&D in this field will be very intense. Fortunately, some of the companies have already raised a significant amount of fund. That shows optimism from the investor side. And finally, there's lack of well-defined innovative communities. Again, I really think the biggest problem with this field is lack of innovators and lack of creative use of the technology.